Introducing Portraits and Ideas. I'm Erlen Gal presenting interviews to inspire and perhaps unveil something new in the realm of ideas. So your name and profession?
Okay. So my name is Morton Schatzman, Schatzman, and I'm a medical doctor and a psychiatrist.
So what advice would you give youth to promote interest in pursuing science or medicine as a career choice?
Okay, well, I think you have to be curious scientifically. Now, in a sense, I think most children are curious about the world as it is, the universe, biology, and I think and I think we all have a residual curiosity and interest, but I think as we get older, I think demands are made of us economically, and people have to do something to have a career or make a living, and so we tend to get distracted, I think, to a large extent from their original curiosity. But the fact that there are science programs that continue to be very popular. One of my recent favorites is an old favorite. It's a guy who everyone in England knows, and I think many people in America know too. David Attenborough makes programs about the living world. So
I've seen David Attenborough's works.
Sure.
Quite
So
remarkable.
there's a lot of, he happens to be a very congenial presenter, which makes it more pleasant to watch. But the stuff he's reporting is, I think, universally interesting. Okay, so anyway, so I originally went into, well, I can give you the real answer to why I think I became a doctor in the first place was I was interested in disease, and I think I was interested in it for selfish reasons. I didn't want to get ill, and I had the fantasy that if I learned medicine, everybody goes into whatever they do with certain wild fantasies about what they're going to achieve. But I think I went into medicine with the fantasy that I was going to do something about my own diseases, and I was going to somehow protect myself magically from getting ill. So if I had all this information, I would be protected.
Sure. Very interesting approach. Like you say, for self-interest, and then of course, obviously that sort of evolved over time toward, say, serving the public.
Well, if you're asking, in a sense, what I wrote down on my medical school application was you had to write little essays. So I would say that I was scientifically curious, and that I also wanted to help my fellow man. And that's largely achieved, actually. But I think the deepest reasons were selfish. I wanted not to get ill myself.
Right. So how did you reach the position you are in today in your profession? I assume you are retired.
No, I'm not.
Oh, you're not. Okay, so that's a poor assumption. so how did you?
To do what I do, which is basically I do psychotherapy now. So to have people just come into my home, which is where I work, and talk to me, I don't have to retire from that. I can do that for the rest of my life. As long as I'm capable of thinking and talking, I don't have to stop doing it.
Sure. So how did you get to this position in terms of the schools that you attended and the milestones in your educational process and your experiences in various areas of work?
So when I went to medical school, and interestingly, the calorie restriction idea, Roy Wolford's idea that, basically from rodents, that you could calorie restriction prolonged life. That idea was around, and I don't think I knew this when I went to medical school, but I learned it in medical school, and I found it stunning. The notion that you could actually seemed that you could prolong life and postpone the diseases of aging by something so apparently simple as restricting your calories.
Mm-hmm.
So that was an important event in my life to learn that. I can't say, however, that I began calorie restricting then, and I regret now that I know that the longer you do it, the more benefit you get, but somehow I didn't begin then. I really began to calorie restrict probably properly about 20 years ago, and I think it was that I became aware suddenly, as one might do, many people do, suddenly became aware of my mortality. I'd always known about it, obviously, everybody knows about it, but it hit me that I was going to die sometime soon, and I can't define what soon was, but I felt anxious about it and decided to institute a practice that I'd known about for many years, but hadn't actually followed.
Mm-hmm. So what school did you get your? I'm American, as you may be able to detect from my speech, but I attended Columbia College in New York City, and then I went to the Albert Einstein School of Medicine, which is in the Bronx in New York, and then I trained, I was an intern at Bellevue Hospital, and then I trained in psychiatry at Mount Sinai Hospital and then at Montefiore Hospital in New York, and then I went to London and on an elective for a few months at the end of my training, and then I met an English woman who I'm still married to, and I have children in England, and so I stayed. So that was I was going to ask you why London, but I get the answer in that regard. So were there any particularly inspiring scientists or researchers or people in medicine that were stimuli for you to go into
yeah, that's a good
profession?
question. Let's see. That's an interesting question. Well, I found the basic science in medical school quite fascinating. Now, if you're asking me about figures in my medical school, there was a cancer researcher whose name has largely been forgotten. He was a pathologist called Alex Novikov, and we had a very good medical education. There were a large number of inspiring people, but among the most inspiring were people in psychiatry, which I think is probably connected with my ultimate career choice, psychiatry.
Sure. That's where you got your basic inspirational.
Yeah. I think that's fair, yes.
Okay, so obviously as a student pursuing medicine, you encounter difficulty at times in certain subjects, and for some students, when they reach a point of difficulty, a lot of them will give up. So what was the protocol that you used to advance past obstacles? Did you have certain strategies of studying that you employed that really helped you to get to a higher level and to get to the point where you felt more confident and you also felt that you had a system in place that you could apply to future obstacles?
Well, that's interesting. Well, when I was a student, so we're talking now about late teens and early 20s. So, I was a young man, and so I used to promise myself romantic intervals. So, I had one girlfriend and then another girlfriend. So I would budget my life in such a way during the week, and then to be able to have a date on a weekend evening, and so that would be the kind of carrot that I would be working towards, that I would be able then to take a break. So I would incentivize myself by looking forward to this date, and then that's how I would buckle down. And I still, interestingly, now, when I have any particular work to do, I'll work for a set period of time, like 50 minutes, and then give myself a 10-minute break, and then go back and work for 50 minutes, and then give myself a 10-minute break. So that's how I really organize myself. I can't say that it sounds more disciplined than I really am, but that's what I try to do.
Right. So you find that having those breaks were critical to sort of getting back to a problem that you couldn't solve, and then maybe you had an epiphany during that break that you carried back to the...
This is just how I used to study.
Sure.
Because you asked me about how I managed to get myself to work. It would be, the incentive would be that there'd be
a break coming.
A girl coming.
Okay.
Or at the end of the...
Right, a reward system.
Exactly. And to some extent, I still do that. I mean, I promise myself, I'll promise myself that I'll watch a television program, or I'll watch a video of something, and that so I look forward to that. But that's really how I get myself. Because I don't know how natural or easy it is for anybody to actually apply themselves, to discipline themselves to work, but that's the kind of strategy I still use, a carrot.
Sure, the carrot. So in a sense, I was asking it in regards to like coming into a point of a roadblock. So I won't try to go through this right now. I'll take a break and then come back to it. See if my brain is still functioning.
Yes.
Right. So what important scientific problems do you see in the world? This is a pretty broad question. Over the next, say, 15 years, and do you have any ideas on how we might solve them?
Oh, that's interesting. Well, you should have given me these questions before, and I could have
thought about it a little bit.
These are serious questions. No.
Well, the idea is, if your thoughts on some of the problems could be a stimulus for a student to pursue an area that you might mention,
Okay, well, I mean...
that they hadn't thought of,
Okay, well, well, everybody, I think, thinks to some extent has to, there are really a few very fundamental scientific problems. And whether we can answer them, I think, is itself an interesting question. So one of them is, how did the universe actually begin? I mean, now, this is, as soon as you're aware, well, we can refine this a little bit. So we now know, which we didn't know until probably about 20 years ago, that everything in the universe is rushing away from everything else in the universe. And everything is rushing away faster and faster. And the further away it gets, the faster it moves. And we don't really understand why this is happening and what is driving the universe apart. And we also don't know, of course, how it all began and where all this stuff came from and how this energy is moving everything away from everything else faster and faster. So we weren't even aware, well, until very recently, that this is a question, because we didn't know what I just said is the case, that everything is rushing away faster and faster. That's one fundamental problem. Next fundamental problem, which we don't have a clue about, which is, how did life begin? Now, you can say that life came from Mars, or that life came from a comet, but you still haven't answered the question as to how it all got assembled, because we now know, to do with DNA and RNA, that it's extremely complicated, and it couldn't happen, so you couldn't have sort of bits and pieces of matter arranging themselves into a 747 plane. I mean, it doesn't happen that bits of matter just assemble themselves into something so complicated as a DNA molecule, which is already very complicated, so, or an RNA molecule. So this is another very fundamental question, which, I mean, since you're asking me, it's not as if I walk around all day worrying about this, but since you're asking me, I mean, I think this is another very serious scientific question. And a third serious scientific question is, how did consciousness get going? Now, you can say that it's incremental and that it begins, that there's it's a gradual incremental growth of knowledge or awareness of some kind, and that it's in much more primitive form, but we still don't know really how mind really begins and how awareness begins, and I think that's another...
Consciousness.
That's the word. Thank you. Right, exactly. So that's the... I think these are the... Since you're asking me, these I think are the fundamental scientific questions. Whether they can ever be answered is another. I don't know.
I think Crick, he after he did the work on DNA, he went into this issue.
Correct.
Of what over at out of San Diego.
That's correct.
At the Scripps Institute. I think.
Correct.
Yeah.
But I have to say, I've read what he had to say, and I think he doesn't advance our understanding of the answer to that question. And right. Okay.
What about Daniel Dennett? Have you looked at any of his?
Of course I have.
Yeah.
No. I mean, it's interesting about studying consciousness itself, but I still think the question is outstanding as to how it all begins. So that's,
Sure.
Okay.
The origins.
The origins.
Yeah, you spoke of two major origins. So
Three. Consciousness, life, and the universe.
And the universe. Yes, correct. I stand corrected. So, do you see any major research in your field in psychiatry breakthroughs over the next 5 to 10 years? And what might they be, and what would be the implications of those breakthroughs?
Okay, so I think, well, So I think in my field, in psychiatry, the main, there are several outstanding problems. In fact, there are all the psychiatric entities we don't really understand very well. The most important and urgent one, especially at my age, is dementia. And I think it's urgent, given the aging population, that we find some way of mitigating the pervasiveness of dementia. So, and to somehow postpone the aging process in the brain. We don't know what schizophrenia is. There is a small amount of evidence, which, as far as I'm concerned, is inconclusive, that schizophrenia may be a disorder of recent origin. By that I mean that when you look at ancient writings, such as Plato, for instance, who wrote about many things, or the tragic playwrights like Sophocles and Aeschylus, you don't find any evidence that what we now call schizophrenia used to exist. So we don't even know if it existed in medieval times. There were people who were called fools, who were put on ships and sent away from home. But we don't know if these fools are actually anything like what we call schizophrenic. And there's also the question of, in Shakespeare, there's nothing quite like a schizophrenic in Shakespeare. The fools in, like the fool in King Lear, for instance, spoke in some respects like people who were schizophrenic, in that they played on puns and on words, but there's nothing that's quite the equivalent of what we now know as schizophrenia. So the whole question of what it is and why we have it and why it's so pervasive, and is it a disorder of modern life in some way? Could it be an infectious agent? So all these are serious questions. And we also, by the way, don't have any correlations with what are mental, or very minimal correlations between what goes on experientially and what you can see on objective measures like MRIs and EEGs and so on. So what we would really like, but I think we're a long way from it if we're ever going to achieve it, is to try to understand what it is that's going on in our brains that's corresponding to our experiences, and particularly, our experiences of just being alive. That's my answer to that question.
So do you see breakthroughs in curing, say, Alzheimer's or curing schizophrenia?
Well, it's probably in relation to Alzheimer's. First of all, it's dementia. It may be that Alzheimer's may be an entity unto itself, and it may be that we're going to categorize some of the other dementias, and it may be that we're going to find treatments for some subcategories of these disorders. There's a great interest, of course, in medication for psychosis. So we've achieved a great deal in that, although we have no idea, as I was saying, what schizophrenia is, or whether it's one entity or several entities, for instance, but we do know that if you give certain antipsychotic drugs, you're going to neutralize the salient features of the disorder. Say you can quieten the hallucinations, you can transform delusional thinking or subdue it, and in some cases transform it into normal thinking. We have no idea, I have to say, why these drugs work. It's been serendipitous that we have found the drugs in the first place. Now, another large entity within psychiatry is bipolar disorder, which, and we now know that there's a relationship between the mania and the depression. Some people have only the depression and never get to the mania. Some people have the mania and never have the depression. But we know that the whole entity, in a sense, runs in families, and that some people will have a parent with one disorder and an offspring with another, but that there's a relationship between the high and the low. And that in itself is a great advance. And we also have a treatment for this, which astonishingly is effective, and we have no idea why. That's a drug called lithium, which is a naturally occurring element, and was discovered also through serendipity, and that seems to protect against both the highs and the lows, which is evidence that whatever this is, it's a unitary disorder in that the same medication can protect against the one and against the other. And we also have effective antidepressant medications, and we have no idea why these are effective either. But we can now do a lot for many of the people who have depression, which is actually, in a sense, a kind of revolution within the field. So we've made a lot of progress without a lot of understanding.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so what would you say at this point is the greatest achievement that you've accomplished in your profession?
Oh, me personally?
Yes.
Well, first of all, that I've stayed alive, I have to say that.
Okay, that's number one.
I mean, I can still function.
Sure.
At my ripe old age and have this interview with you.
Right.
So, I'm not a scientist by profession, unless you regard the investigation of each individual's mind as itself a research project, because it's extremely interesting to examine the links between, say, any individual's childhood, upbringing, pattern of early relationships, and how they've turned out, and also to be able to choose from the pharmacopoeia which drugs might help which individuals, although I have to say, after many years of experience, it's still very largely guesswork as to what drugs will work with which individuals. Sometimes you can find out a lot by asking if anybody else in the family has had something similar to what this individual has, by asking the right questions and finding out what some other individual within the family, biologically connected, has benefited from. You might be able to help the individual that you're now seeing.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So that's been an advance in the field.
Getting down to the last couple of questions on this, what would you say would be a typical working day in your profession? How would it function?
Well, it's okay. That's an interesting question. So, generally speaking, if you work as a psychotherapist, which means, okay, so there are really different kinds of things that I do. One of them is I see people for initial consultation and evaluation, and in that respect, I function a lot like a doctor who is taking a history, doing an examination, although I'm not actually touching people, but I'm doing, in a sense, what you call a mental status examination, in that I'm finding out about how they're functioning in the world. So that's a kind of research I do. So in a sense. So that's the initial consultation. Then I do ongoing psychotherapy. You're asking me about my typical working day. So if I'm seeing people in consultation, I generally take as much time as required, so that could be as much as 2.5 hours just to see someone initially. So generally, I'll do that whenever a person can fit it in with their work. And the same for ongoing psychotherapy. There tends to be a bunching of work, of my work, towards the end of other people's working days. So early in the morning, before they go to work, and towards the late afternoon and evening when they finish work. And sometimes people can see me at lunchtime. So there tends to be a bunching of my working day into mornings, lunchtime, and evenings with breaks in between. Sometimes Saturdays too.
Sure.
Okay.
Sure. What's your definition of success?
Ah. Well, first of all, most things that people see psychiatrists for don't allow for simple successes. Now, most of the people I see have some sort of chronic difficulties, chronic inadequacies to do with, well, first of all, people who see me in an ongoing fashion have to be able to afford it. So it means that they have to be able to be in work of some kind. Now, there are basically two goals in a psychotherapist practice. One of them is to get people to succeed at work or to stay at a job, and another is to succeed in their love life. So for them to have a successful relationship with a partner. I think these are the limited goals that a psychotherapist can achieve in working with people. One of the things one learns when one works as a psychiatrist or a psychotherapist is one's limitations. One cannot transform a person who comes to you, who's had a life before they get to you, and early fetal, early neonatal, childhood, adolescent life before they get to you. So a lot of is already very set. But so what you do is you try to work around the edges and improve their lives. If someone is having difficulty at work, you try to help them to be able to stay in work. If they're having trouble in a relationship, you try to help them to stabilize the relationship. I would consider those kinds of things successes. I would also consider helping people to get on the right medications with respect to their psychiatric state, also very useful. And because I'm trained as a doctor, I also can be a very good medical resource. I have a general knowledge of things to do with medicine, and I try to keep up, partly out of just curiosity and partly out of a concern to live long myself. And so I try to keep my knowledge of medicine up to date, and so I can dispense a lot of medical information as part of the work that I do in psychotherapy.
Mm-hmm. So that's a very good response, and I think that would be a very positive motivational tool for students who might want to pursue your field. So I really appreciate that. When and how long have you been practicing CR, and describe your particular way of practicing CR?
Okay.
Which is caloric restriction.
Yes.
And you can start with giving your name again.
Okay. Right. Okay. My name is Morton Schatzman, spelled SCHATZMAN. I have to say that, like a lot of other things in life, it's a struggle. So it doesn't come easy to me to calorie restrict. my wife does not calorie restrict. She eats ad lib. She's a good weight, but we have separate fridges. So, and my fridge is, if you open the door, you'll see that it's bean mixture and it's vegetables and fruit. She has her own fridge near mine, and she happens to like cheese. So it's always a temptation for me, you see, especially if I can't sleep at night or something, to come down and raid her fridge.
For the tryptophan, yeah, right, in the cheese.
You could say that.
Yeah, right.
That's kind.
midnight snack. Yeah.
So I do manage. I mean, the trick I use, I have to say, is to weigh myself every day. So if I'm veering a little off my target weight, and I wish I'd asked the question that I'm now going to propose to you, which is, what is an ideal BMI? I mean, I didn't ask it, and I thought, immediately the conference ended, I thought I should have asked the panel, what is an ideal BMI? Because, I mean, and Stephen Spindler volunteered, it's between 20 and 25.
That's what I was going to say. That was the only time anybody mentioned that, did
Yeah. It seems to me that through all this, it's a crucial question. So, I mean, there are people who allege, and I'm really sorry I didn't ask them, so there are people who allege that it's better to be 19 or 18 or 17 and a half. So, I don't know. I would like to have heard what
the panel had to say.
What they have to say about it.
Sure.
Now, I try to keep, I have a BMI which roughly about 19 and a half. But one of the things I've learned, which also didn't come up today, I'll tell you, is that, you know, BMI is based on height squared, but actually we're in 3 dimensions. So a better measure would be something that, well, probably maybe waist measurement is a waist to hip ratio, waist measurement, but I mean, I tried to, I struggle, but and if this is what I wanted to say, the shorter you are, the lower your BMI has to be. So someone like, for instance, Michael Jordan, so he can have a much higher BMI because he's taller. So, and you see the BMI also varies. The ideal BMI comes down as you get shorter.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, this is a question that really I would like to have
seen that experts talk about.
Yeah, that's right.
Right.
Okay, so I try to keep my BMI roughly around 19, 20, which is what I think is a good BMI. So if I step on the scale and my weight is a little bit higher, so that day I'll tend to eat a little less. So that's how I regulate. Adjust for maintaining a kind of a stable continuum. So how would you describe your diet? You mentioned beans and a few other things. So your diet, what would that consist of mainly? Okay, it's a good question. Well, first of all, I have to tell you that one of the things that makes my life difficult is I have a son. I have a son in New York and a son in London. The son in London lives next door to me, and he has 3 children. And he's married to a woman who also has 3 children. And so we often go out to eat, you see. So this becomes problematic for someone like me, especially since all the kids are challenging me. Well, why are you so peculiar in the way you eat? You know that? Why can't you be normal? And so eat like we all do. So there's a kind of pressure which I succumb to. I have to say, when we go out to eat like a normal person. So I will have pizza, because we sometimes choose to go to a pizza place. So I appease my interest in calorie restriction by ordering a vegetarian pizza, but that doesn't really.
Right. It's a cosmetic. Yeah, right. Makes you feel good. Yeah, exactly.
So, I'm getting my fulfilling my quota of vegetables. But so no, it's basically what I do is about once a week I prepare a mixture of every kind of bean that my health food shop will have, and I soak them, and then I heat them, and so and then I put them in the fridge, and then and then every day, once a day, I'll have a mixture of my beans and some vegetables which I steam, and then I drink the juice that filters through, and so and I have fruit. So that's my diet, but it's often broken, as I say, by reading my wife's fridge or by going out to dinner. So I do my best.
Sociable.
I do my best.
That's right, in that context, right. So what exercise regime do you do?
I do. Oh, no, that's where I'm okay. So every day I get up, I brush my teeth, and I'll have a cup of coffee, and I'll have a few blueberries, and then I do a workout, and I do a workout every day for a half an hour, and that involves going on an elliptical cross trainer and doing weights and doing push-ups and sit-ups, and I have a weighted vest that I wear when I do my exercises, and so I think I'm doing something about osteoporosis at the same time, and so that I do, if I may say so, religiously. I'm conscientious about seeing to it, and even here in the hotel, I've been to the gym.
I saw you there this morning.
That's right.
Right.
So I do that.
Sure. So, do you take supplements?
Yes, only I'll tell you what I do take. I take vitamin D every day. So I've had my vitamin D levels measured, and I've found that to get the right blood levels, and I know that depending on where you go to have your D levels measured, you'll get different outcomes. It's not very well standardized, and I don't think it's a very accurate test. But in any case, I've come around to the view that if I take 2,000 IUs Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, and 1,000 all the other 4 days, that I'll get approximately the right blood levels.
Mm-hmm.
So it's D3.
Mm-hmm.
And then I learned this at one of these conferences.
Right.
And it also, I think it's a good differentiating agent and may have some protective effect against malignancies. And then I also take, I have wild salmon 3 times a week. And on the days when I don't have the wild salmon, I take fish oil supplements. So, and 3 times a week, I take B supplements. So I don't know how, I can't remember any longer how I've worked out about folic acid and B6 and B12, but I take B complex, but I've managed to I think get the right dosage. So I take those 3 times a week, and fish oil on the days that I'm not having fish, and vitamin D, as I told you.
Do you fast?
No.
Do you, not at all. Like even time-limited feeding, in terms of the way you space your meals?
Not really.
The
The other thing I didn't tell you about nuts. So I have a mixture of raw nuts. And when I steam my vegetables, I put the nuts onto the vegetables. Do I? No. Well, you see, the problem is if you're living in a marital relationship in which your wife has dinner every night, and this is when you get together after a day, you sit down together. I mean, you eat as a kind of social thing. So, no, I have to say I don't fast. I can't. It's not socially possible.
Sure, it's difficult. So what creative endeavors or hobbies do you have that will keep your mind active, and how do you exercise your brain? In addition to your work, of course.
Which is very stimulating.
Sure.
One of the things first of all, I'm a kind of information junkie. So I live in London, but I can read the New York Times every day online. So particularly interested in health columns, as you might guess. I have various medical sites like Medscape that I visit regularly. So that's one of the ways in which I occupy my mind. I also occasionally have written articles for an English weekly called New Scientist. Of course, I'm a bit of a junkie journalist. I have written actually about, I think I wrote an article about calorie restriction a long time ago for New Scientist. I have written articles about dreaming for New Scientist. So, because one of the things I have been interested in is the process by which we go to sleep and how we get to dream and whether dreams mean anything. So that is another kind of interest that I have intellectually. I've, as I say, written book reviews. Latterly, I've been writing obituaries as people I know die. I mean, there's a particular newspaper that I have a kind of relationship with, and so if anyone of interest to me dies, obituary. So I do a bit of kind of limited journalism.
Sure. Okay, the last question is, what advice would you give to those who might want to pursue caloric restriction as a lifestyle?
Oh, well, there are a number of people, of course, who marry, well, very few, actually, within the group. Interesting question. Well, first of all, I don't know if I do have any advice, but I haven't actually been able to influence many people. But, okay, that's not quite true. No, within my patient population, so to speak, I've tried to get everybody I see. This just comes out in the course of a relationship which becomes, in some ways, a little bit like a friendship. So you tend to give people you know the benefit or not of your points of view about many things. So I will tend to encourage people to lose weight, to eat well, not to smoke, and in some cases I've actually got some people who were smoking now not to smoke, which I regard as a major. You asked me about achievements.
Right.
That's a major
success.
Major success.
Right.
Is to have somebody who stop smoking as a consequence of coming to see me. I regard that as
major achievement.
Major achievement.
Because you're saving a life, essentially.
Right, and so now I would tell you. So with respect to my own, I have a son in New York, and I have a son in London. The son in London regards me as a nutcase in the same way as my wife does, for pursuing a disciplined diet. And his children and his second wife's children also regard me as peculiar. So, but I have a son in New York who actually follows. So, I mean, all the time he was growing up, he didn't listen to anything I said, no advice, nothing about anything I ever recommended to him. But he's now a calorie restrictor himself. So he watches very carefully what his wife buys and shops for and what he puts in his fridge. And so he's a kind of calorie restrictor. So that's interesting.
A big surprise to the father. Fantastic. Well, I would consider that a major achievement because I have 2 sons as well, you know, and they are not calorie restrictors. But in any case, thank you very much, Dr. Schatzman.
Thank you. That was a pleasure. I enjoyed that very much.
Okay, well, that's good feedback for me because I want to improve my how should we say, capability of doing this.
No, you asked a good question.
Okay.